I take it on the chin. What? Weird. Anyways. What's going on, you beautiful freaks? Welcome to the inaugural first episode of Albie Tut'n. So today, with the very first project, we're going to be working on a character from Overwatch, the one and only Doomfist. So let's talk about the type of players who choose him first. Number one, these are the guys who are usually rushing into the battlefield. They're usually the first to die. They can't hit anybody with their little hand cannon thing. Number three, when they use their ults, they don't hit anybody. And number four, after you lose, these are the people complaining in the chat about how everybody else is useless. Those players really piss me off. They're really one of the worst. But you know what? I'm actually one of those players because I'm horrible, absolutely horrible with Doomfist. But I realize that he's not only a fun character, but the amount of aesthetics that they put into him when creating him is really, really cool. He has one of the most aesthetically impressive looking weapons out there. Obviously, that big ass arm, that cybernetic arm that he has, it's really, really cool. So this is what I wanted to start with today. And with the new release of Moira, he doesn't get the same amount of attention and fanfare that I think he should, so I wanted to honor that with today's modeling. So the final output will be for my Instagram and for my online portfolio, so it's going to be relatively small. We're going to be working with about 800 pixels at 200 frames, so we're just going to put it on a loop. So we're going to keep it relatively low poly, and you guys are going to see in the full tutorial about how we're going to composite the whole thing. Alright, so let's get started with today's first official tutorial on 3D modeling and animation and compositing, okay? Okay, so here is the final overview. We're going to be using Max to create the final model. We're going to be using V-Ray for the render engine, as well as the materials. We're going to be using Rayfire plugin for the destructible environment for the ground that he punches through. And then once we finish all the animation and the simulations, we're going to be jumping into Photoshop to create a projected blue ring effect for his Meteor Strike. We're going to use that as an alpha and project it from a spotlight. After we do all of that, we're going to be rendering out 3 separate elements: a complete map, the self-illumination map, and a projected light select, which I'll show you guys within the screenshot. So these 3 elements, we're going to combine it all into After Effects along with a sound clip. We're going to be using a pixelate filter, the magic bullet for the looks, and then just a simple motion blur, and then along with his sound effect when he does his ult. So this is going to be the final product.
Meteor Strike! Meteor Strike!
But first, a word from our sponsor. I would like to thank the sponsor of today's tutorial video, Melon Fingers. They are fine purveyors of tasty melon flavored fingers. They're soy-free, gluten-free, nut-free, and hand-free. If you're gonna put a finger in your mouth, might as well make it a melon with Melon Fingers. Now available in 4 delicious flavors: brown, black, white, and yellow. Thank you, Melon Fingers. Okay, so step 1, I go inside of the hero gallery, or you can find other references online that show his perspective view and orthographic views. You want to have a wider range of reference images, so that way you know the scale of things. You can see the little details on his spikes, the piping on the back of his arm, the turbine engines on his wrists. So just having a good amount of reference images that you can use that are pretty much set to scale. So once you start to pick apart the model, you can make sure that your scaling is correct. So I save it out as a reference images, and be sure to note that whatever size document you create or export out into Photoshop, you match it in your reference plane in 3D. I think I have it at 1808 by 1017. And what I normally do is I put it on a plane and I push it away from the y-axis. For the other software, it might be on the z-axis, but for me, if you're looking at the front view, you just push it back away from 0, 0, 0 from your reference point. So now I apply the material I make sure to freeze it, and in Max you can freeze your plane so you can draw on top of it, but make sure you uncheck the show frozen in gray. And that will be our master plane that we will be using to sketch off of. So here I start with one of the main pieces. This is going to be that main gauntlet piece. And notice that because I sketched it from the perspective view, it's not 100% symmetrical. But that's fine because I create a new spline which will be a perfect axis. They're all symmetrical in terms of the vertices. I extrude it out and I start to make the little details of it. Now remember, we're going to be going with a low poly look, so we won't be too concerned with the amount of details that we're going to be putting into it. Just enough to show a really good silhouette, show enough of the boolean or some of the main details that show. So for example, I'm not going to put the DF emblem on that piece that I just created. It's just going to be basically just a really good silhouette. So we're going to cut down on the turbo smooth and all those details and stuff. We're just going to be actually taking out any kind of smoothing group and just keeping it very faceted, keeping the low poly look. So here I am, I'm creating a simple just material library. I'm going to be using a multi-sub in Max. So the way that works is each one of those numbers on the ID corresponds to a specific material shader. And depending upon what polygon ID I put onto the face of it, that determines the material that we'll be using. Okay, so here I am, I'm working on the turbine, the little engines that give them that rocket punch. And just notice that it's not going to be completely 100% to scale most of the time, just because the reference images that I have isn't a flat view. It's not like the other Overwatch characters. The older ones, they used to have a reference kit, which is really helpful. This one I just made from scratch. But it's not too bad. I think everything's pretty much to scale in terms of the synchronicity of all the other elements that are next to each other. Now here I'm adding the quick materials. So there I set up, I think I have for the ID2, I'm using just a brown metal, and those pieces that I'm selecting right now, they're gonna have a glowing piece on it. There we go. Make sure you're always working in 000 coordinate setting. This way, when you tend to use a symmetry modifier or a mirror modifier, everything works perfectly. So you only work on one side, thereby saving you time and space for, you know, your speed flow will definitely be much faster in terms of modeling and creating. You don't have to worry about vertices flying off. Okay. Here we are. So we're working more towards the wrist right now. So I know it can be a little daunting when you're working first, when you have so many references and you have to know, okay, which part do I start in? But it's good to start from a general point and then build off of that. So that's why when you're creating your reference images in Photoshop, make sure the images and elements are sort of to scale, so that way you can move around and double check yourself in your reference plane in 3D. So let's continue with the hand. This is going to be for his wrist and knuckle area. And you're going to see that I'm working off of a perspective view. There's no front view that shows it nice and evenly. But what I'm going to do is build something that's somewhat blend of scalability and something that's close to the perspective. I then cut it in half, and then I'm going to put a symmetry modifier on it. And I work on one side, so this way I can get a feel of what it can look like, something that I'm going to be happy with. Working more on the top of the glove area and extruding out those details. And then again, remember, we're not going to add a bunch of details to it. We're just going to make it available and malleable to work with. So I'm adding these vertical segments on it. Once I group it together, I'm going to be using a bend modifier to create the curvature of it. Now what I also like to do is, once I build a good section of it, I clone it, but I make sure that I set it as a reference point. So basically anything that I modify to one area of the object, it does it to the child object, so it's linked together. And also make sure that for those of you who are new to 3D modeling, it's always good to have a stack of editable polys or editable modifiers, whichever software you're using. For me, it's Mac, so I use the edit poly, and basically these works as history states or like Photoshop layers. So you're not creating all of your elements and all of your changes on one layer. This way you can toggle off and on, oh, okay, do I like this portion? Do I like this extrusion? Okay, so now we're going to start working on the knuckle spikes. This is a really cool piece. So because, again, it's low poly, I think this is going to be just something really quick that I use all over Doomfist's his arm. It's going to be pretty much the same model, but I just tweak the scale for some portions. There you go. I'm insetting it, getting it somewhat close. Nothing too crazy. You'll notice that it starts to bow as I put the bend modifier, but you can tweak around the settings and to not make it look so bowed out. Okay, so there it is. So there's that slight curvature that I was talking about. Now we're going to be working on the side of his hand, the side of his palm. So this is the perfect example of that reference. Everything I build on one side, it's reflecting upon the other. Now, you might be thinking, why would I need to do that? Well, if you're building something that's off perspective, you want to have one element or the master object, the one that you're referencing, to be fully flush to the camera to scale. So that way you don't have to worry about the weird placements of the faces and the vertices. You just want it straight to camera. Okay, so we are on to one of my favorite parts, adding the little materials and stuff. So for me, when I'm building and modeling all of these components, sometimes my eyes get so fixed on, one color at a time. I like to reward myself with adding the materials. It makes me feel like I'm one step closer to finishing the final model. So I'm going through everything, using the multi-sub and selecting the ID channels, applying the materials to their respective pieces. I'm feeling closer to constructing the hand now. So with the fingers built, I place them. I put a little bend on it just to have the look and make sure the scaling and all the elements fit together perfectly, including the construction of once they have the bend modifier on it. Finishing up with the thumb area. And notice that the final output that I'm planning to use for this is animating with keyframes and forward kinematics. We're not going to be using bones. It's just, I think it might be a little bit too overkill for just 200 frames. So we're just going to keep it relatively simple. And notice that these are not the final materials. This is just me using just a color picker. I'll get more finalized once I'm closer to rendering, and once I finish the look dev and start doing all the test renders. Alright, so I believe I've finished the construction of his hand. Now I'm working on his elbow, the elbow area where the the pistons stay. And I think this is the portion that touches and grips Doomfist, his inner arm. These pivot points, these cylindrical things, they really help sell the believability of things. I don't know, it's one of my favorite parts, whether you're drawing or, you know, working in 3D. I love making these little decals, these little cylinder metals. It shows like the pivot rotations of these things, so it's really interesting. Okay, so there we are. Hand constructed, the forearm guard area, the thrusters, are built. Now we're going to be working on the back portion. First, triceps. Okay. Making sure to take great care when you're modeling. So this is the symmetry modifier. It makes it really fast for me. So essentially I'm only building one side, and the symmetry, you know, you have to trust it inherently to work. So that's why you want to work at 0, 0, 0. Makes it really clean and efficient. Okay, we're starting to work on the piston areas for his arm, for the back. And because it's low poly, I work with an octagon cylinder and then just extrude it up. It gives it that nice low poly look. So it's really cool. Okay, adding the materials, adding those little inset bevels, those detail lines. Cool, we have our color. So every time I add a color, it's actually a little treat for me. It lets me get a mental candy that says, okay, you're closer to finishing this. Alright. There's those details, the little cylinder details that I love. Man, it's doing things like this that, especially with this first tutorial, I hope you guys find my enthusiasm and passion for 3D. You know, it's one of these things where it's just, I would love to do this every day, and I get to, which is the beautiful part. Alright, so there we are. We're about maybe 50% done. This part was really hard. This is the top shoulder piece. There was no like decent view of it as much as I tried. Even, you know, opening up the hero gallery and getting a nice screenshot of it. It was just a really hard perspective to get, but you know, you make do with what you have, and you know, don't beat yourself up. Don't take it too seriously. It's supposed to be art. You know, you're supposed to have fun with it. It's supposed to feel. You're supposed to feel happy when you're modeling these things, and I think that's the best thing that you could honestly do for yourself. It's just finding your passion to create the things that you want. And for me, it's 3D, it's art, and to be able to share it with you guys, and hopefully you guys will learn something from this. And it's all about sharing the things that you love. Cool. So we're gonna be working on the detailed horns next. We're gonna start out with a box, keep it low poly, and I'm scaling it up, making sure everything works. I'm fitting it within the confines of the topmost cylinder. So usually when working in low poly, you have to decide whether you're working with how many faces. So instead of me working off of a cylinder and extruding it up, I don't need that amount of vertices and faces when I'm constructing it. So sometimes you just have to decide which procedure works best, which is with most 3D and 2D software. There's so many ways to create things. You don't have to stick to one rule. It's always good to experiment. So for this one, starting with a box and finessing and vertex pushing my way in order to make it really sharp. And notice this is where I'm working off of one symmetrical plane. Once I feel that it's okay, and it looks good to me, I'm starting the texture of it. Now, if you look closely at the reference image, it's actually a gradient. It goes from the tip, which is a dark brown, all the way to like a bone beige that it goes to. So what I'm using is a gradient wrap, which I'm tweaking for the amount, and I'm applying a UV map setting it to a plane and fixing the limits of it. Basically, choosing the axis that fits perfectly, and just extruding the width and the height and the length. There we go. Cool. All right, so pretty much everything has been built so far in terms of the horns and the base details. Now we're going to work on the that little silver details with the 3 holes in them. Moving on, we're going to work on animating the fingers. We're going to be using the parent-child linking method. So basically, tip of the finger child gets linked to the middle bone gets linked to the top bone gets linked to the knuckle, and knuckle gets linked to the hand. So parent-child abduction method, minus the abduction. But yeah, so making sure that the fingers unfurl themselves. Make sure also that you're working within the local method setting. So I'm rotating using the local method. So it's not to screen or it's not to the world, it's just to the object's local setting. Here we go. So I want it to unfurl like this and close its fist as it moves up and slams down to the ground. So something simple. And then I'm making sure that after everything looks finalized, this isn't the final mode, but after I feel that it's a good basing start, I go into the curve editor and add some more tweaks, set it to smooth or to slow. That's it. Jumping in back right into Max, we're going to be working with Rayfire plugin. So it allows for destructible, fragmented simulations that you can create. It's really cool. I'm starting with a Voronoi radial as a base, and then I'm going to crack the shit out of it right now. There it is. And then now I'm building the reference fist for Doomfist. Kit Fisto, Wilson Fisk. Okay, never mind. And then here we are. I'm using that reference to smash down instead of the actual hand. I have to deal with less collision and less issues, so a primitive object. Boom! There we go, baby. Okay, there's the final destruction. Ah, sick, sick, sick. Alright, and here is the camera view. Sweet, okay. Alright, freaks, we're at the home stretch. Here's the reference of Doomfist's ult. We're going to be in Photoshop. We're going to create that radial circle. Remember, Targa has 32-bit channel, which includes the alpha. Black means transparent. We're going to apply that Targa to a projection map within Max. We're going to use a spotlight for it. I'm going to do some test renders on it. Make sure that it works. There it is. It's projecting the alpha map. Okay. There we go, beautiful. So you're going to turn up the brightness on it, make sure that it works. Here's that cylindrical piece that lets you target, all those people grouped together after Zarya shoots her that pulse bomb, that graviton bomb. I take it on the chin. What? Weird. Anyways, okay, there it is. Gonna be doing some more test renders on this. So these things we're going to be exporting out separately. We're going to have a self-illumination map, which is the cylinder, and a light select for the actual glow ring. These things will be exported out and rendered separately, and then we'll compile it and composite it within After Effects. Cool. Okay, wrapping this up. We're going to finalize the material selection, like I said. We're going to get closer to that rich golden Nigerian cybernetic gold. And an interesting thing about gold shaders, it has a hint of green, like a puke green, barf green in it, which is really good on the reflectivity of it. So it's really nice. It gives it that nice thick saturation meatiness to it. It's really cool. But of course this is going to change also once we work in the filters in After Effects. So I'm just double checking to make sure that all my elements render out correctly. This is the self-illumination tube, and you'll see in a bit, once it's done rendering, everything's going to be in a black background. I'm going to render it out as a PNG so it has the alpha. And then I'm going to layer these guys together in After Effects to increase the brightness and the saturation. I'm going to put a glow on it, and then we're going to jump into the final tweak. So basically changing the composition. I'm going to put more stuff in the foreground, make it much more interesting so the light casts on these rocks and it curves, stuff like that. Making sure everything just looks good for the final render. Jumping into After Effects. Here we have all of our effects set up. I have a motion blur. I'm using a Lux from Magic Bullet, and chromatic aberration and twitch, making sure the camera shakes, and we have everything pretty much set up. So there you have it. Thank you for joining me on this wonderful first tutorial, everybody. I'm very humbled to be here and to share what I know. Hopefully you guys are going to create something cool as well and are inspired to do something awesome. First tutorial, like I said, so feel free to subscribe and like, and let me know if there's anything that I can do to help you out. I know I stutter a bit, but that's because my brain is kind of wonky, but I can't do anything on that. So leave a comment, give me some love, help boost my ego, and if you want to be an asshole and fight in the comments, let's do it. So for now, thank you.